I'm Eric Nason with Newsshooter.com, and we are at Cine Gear 2018, and I'm joined with Alex from Zero Optics. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing excellent. You guys have some really interesting lenses. They're rehoused lenses, they're vintage lenses, but they're a little bit more than just rehoused lenses. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, so we fully re-engineer everything mechanically, and in some cases we have to modify the underlying optics to make them as close to cinema spec as possible.
And that's not easy, and it's also important that these aren't just old lenses stuck in a new housing, because we've seen this in the past.
Yeah.
This is a whole different deal.
Yeah, in some cases the only original part of the lens in there is the glass itself. We'll change out irises, we'll change out the complete focus mechanism is from scratch. Yeah, everything is ground up.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little about some of the newer products that you guys are working on right now.
Yeah.
This one over here looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, so this is our rehousing for the 58mm Noct Nikkor that Nikon came out with in the late 70s. It was designed for astrophotography, so its performance at f1.2 is beyond anything else that hits that stop. It T-stops at a 1.3, so it's as close to a master prime as you can get in full frame coverage. It's unbeatable.
And let's talk a little about the mechanics of the lens and how the focus throw is.
Yeah, so we've a lot of people ask us whether we've reversed the direction of the focus, which would imply that we've kept anything that Nikon put in there. It's a totally new focus cam. It turns in the right direction, and it's a 300-degree throw. So you have a lot of room between infinity and close focus, which on this one is about 1 foot. The original factory close focus was about 2 feet. So we've actually managed to improve that as well.
Now, if somebody wants to acquire a lens like this one,
Yes.
How does that work? I mean, do they have to buy the lens, send it to you? Do you source them and sell them as a complete, rehoused lens?
We're not doing turnkey. All of our clients send us lenses that they source because that's honestly a full-time job. We're working with another company that is starting to source glass for stuff like this, and they'll be able to sell turnkey sets, but they won't be available from us directly.
Now, Nikon is not typically the lens that people are talking about rehousing. We hear
Right.
a lot of other type of lenses, but Nikon was like the king of the crop back in the 70s and 80s, right?
Yeah, and it's actually their pedigree in cinematography goes back quite a ways as well. A lot of VistaVision visual effects stuff used to be Nikon. If you go back through old ASC manuals, you'll find a lot of cameras were offered in PL, PV, and Nikon mount. So it's something that it fell off the radar in the last 20 years or so, but we found once we debuted this at NAB, we were inundated with emails for people who'd been desperate to get their hands on rehoused Nikons.
So what is the focal lengths that are you able to rehouse for these Nikon lenses?
So the full AIS set that we're working on is going to extend from 15 millimeters all the way to 300. And for people who are used to Super 35 focal lengths, it doesn't seem quite wide enough and it seems very long. But when you switch to a full frame format, 300 is a pretty comfortable length to work at.
All right. So next up, we have a very interesting lens here. This is really cool.
This was a fun one. RVZ, a rental house in Paris, actually brought us this one. It's an Angenieux 50mm 0.95 lens. It wasn't originally designed for cinematography or photography. It was sort of a military surveillance lens that they built between the 60s and 80s. They're extremely hard to come by, and it required modifying the rear optical group because it physically would not fit in a PL mount. So it's a lot of fun to have this finally finished.
And this one also has your own iris blades as well, and
Yep.
and like you said, this is completely like you're taking the lenses, you're cleaning them up,
Yes.
and you're just making them work perfectly for cinematography.
Exactly. The only part of this lens that Angenieux is responsible for is the 6 pieces of glass. Brand new 16-blade iris. Everything else is a ground-up design specifically for this.
Now you showed me, and we'll try to demo this, but
Yeah.
the look of that lens, wide open, even like far away from it, you actually have separation. It's
Yeah.
quite unique, quite unique.
It's very unique. At a T1 and f.95, your depth of field is razor thin. So even focused at 25 feet, you have a very clear delineation between what is in focus and the background that's out, the foreground that's out. And we also stepped up the close focus on this one. It's about 9-10 inches, which is wide open. Just there's
Oh, the bokeh is like so creamy. It just completely just smooth like milk.
We aimed to make this as much of a macro as possible. To just it's an effects lens.
Now, did a customer just say, "Hey, I got this crazy Angenu lens. What do you think? Can you do something with it?"
Yeah, effectively. They said we've got 4 of these. Nobody else has been able to do anything with it. If you can rehouse it, we want all 4 done.
It's like the lens challenge.
Exactly, and honestly, that's my favorite part is the challenge.
So now that you've actually figured out how to do this, are you going to try to source some of these lenses and maybe sell them as like, one of your own products type thing?
Potentially. They're definitely few and far between. So if we can find a couple, you can bet they'll go pretty fast.
Now that everybody's going to know about it.
Now that everybody knows about it.
All right, we got a third lens to talk about.
Yes.
Now this one is also very vintagey.
Extremely vintagey. This is the original Bausch & Lomb Baltar, which was actually designed and released in the late 30s. These were designed before reflex systems were a thing, so the very widest focal lengths sit deep into a camera, which means now that digital cinematography is so widespread, you can actually use them again. For the longest time, for decades, on film bodies, it just couldn't work.
Wow. And let's take a quick look inside of there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is the 50 mil. It's an f2.3 T2.5. The 40 and up actually in this set cover full frame really nicely. This is a gorgeous lens on a full frame sensor.
And again, this was just a customer that had this idea. Hey, what can you do with it?
No, this was actually our very first rehousing. I started just collecting some of these lenses. And once you have 2 or 3 focal lengths, you figure, might as well go for the full set. And by the time I had all 8 focal lengths, I was pretty deep into the rehousing process.
And what type of, productions have ever been used with this lens? I think, were we talking a little bit about that earlier?
Probably the most famous is, I think, Gordon Willis on Godfather. It was shot mostly with the Super Baltars, which came out in the 60s, but a lot of it was shot with the 40 mil original Baltar because of focal length that just wasn't available anywhere else.
Get a little bit of that Godfather for you.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little about pricing.
Yeah.
Because people are basically sourcing the lens and then sending them to you for the rehousing. Let's talk a little about how much it would cost to do this the service on these 3 lenses.
Sure. The original Baltar is fairly simple mechanically. These start at about $3,250 for the wider focal lengths and go to about $4,000 for the longer ones. The Nikons are going to start at about $4,000. And then because some of them have floating elements or very sensitive optics, they're going to go somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6,000 for the really sophisticated, complex stuff. And then this one, just by virtue of being so unusual, this is $6,000 to rehouse. But when you compare that to the price that you see for the original cells, which float around $8,000 or $10,000, that's a steal.
Right, and they're very unique lenses. This is not like a kind of an off-the-shelf kind of look.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to be hard-pressed to walk into a rental house that has one of those.
So you think because of what you guys are doing, you think these Nikons are going to be flying off the shelves in eBay? People really just going to be looking for them, and they're like, oh, I can make these really great lenses.
Yep.
Put them on and shoot some features and documentaries with them.
Absolutely. Even just since NAB, the price of this lens has gone up substantially on eBay. They've gotten a lot harder to source. The nice thing about Nikon is it's one of the few sort of semi-vintage still lens companies where you can still buy 80s era glass new from the factory. You can go to B&H Photo or Adorama and find these lenses for a few $100s, as opposed to Leica R's or Canon FDs where the price just gets jacked up and up and up.
Very expensive, right? Okay, and what is usually the turnaround time for customers to get a lens rehoused?
It depends on the lens. Something like the Noct, we actually we have a production run for these finishing up, so we're going to be shipping about 20 of these next month.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Good stuff.
Good talking.